a LitHub Radio podcast.
Hello, writers, memoirists, family historians, life chroniclers, journalers, and personal essayists. I'm Grant Faulkner, and I'm here with my co-host, Brooke Warner, whose love of memoir is contagious. I know that because her love of memoir has spread to me, and Brooke and I have some news to share with you that is huge for us. It's been a long time coming, so we might have spilled a bean or two here or there in the last couple of months. I'm horrible at keeping secrets, especially when it's about something I'm proud of and want the world to see. But I'm thinking, Brooke, that we use this moment as a way to learn how to create suspense on the page, a learning moment. And the best way to create suspense, as I learned from the author Lee Child, is to invite people over for a dinner party and then have them sit in the living room and smell all the wonderful food being cooked in the kitchen, and to then not serve the food for a long time. So suspense is essentially about making your guests get hungrier and hungrier as they smell the hints of things to come. So I'll let one scent escape from the kitchen. We have big news for the world of memoirists, and we'll tell you more. But first, I want to ask you, Brooke, are you a person who has to tell someone news right away, or are you more tight-lipped? Can you keep a secret, in other words?
Well, I will say I've gotten better at being more tight-lipped the older I get. I used to be the kind of person who couldn't stand to keep any secrets, especially if they were exciting secrets. But when it comes to things like this secret we've been holding about our next venture, and also with recent stuff I've been going through at She Writes Press, I've really come to see the benefits of not feeling like I need to let people in before the thing is fully baked. But Grant, now that our thing is fully baked, I think we're finally ready to tell it. And what I will say is that I love the thrill of exciting news. So are you ready to announce it?
Okay, I like how you worked in baked twice. It's fully baked. But I had thought that we could do like a 3-hour podcast where we'd eke out our news hint by hint and then tell it all at the end. But here goes. 1, we're launching a new memoir writing organization. 2, Right Minded, the podcast, is going to be a vital part of it all. And 3, it's going to be big and wonderful and rock the world of memoir writing. So first, the new memoir writing organization is called Memoir Nation, because we're a nation of storytellers. And the most important story we have to tell is our own story. You know, our tagline is, your life is waiting for just one thing, your life story. And the reason I think that tagline is important, Brooke, is I hear so many people say, I'm going to write my story someday. But someday tends to always be off in the distance. And we want Memoir Nation to help people start writing their story today. So we're going to host an annual, what we're calling a commitment-a-thon event each year in January. So we're calling it Jan Your Story. And Jan Your Story is a challenge to write 500 words per day in 1 month, to start your memoir and then build momentum to finish your story by year's end. And then we'll provide different levels of membership services, including ongoing classes and events and a writing community to fuel your creative spirit and guide you on your memoir journey.
Yeah, from the moment you said Jan Your Story, I knew that was going to be the title of our commitment event. I love it. It makes me laugh. And we also want Memoir Nation to be a place of fun, but also serious learning, you know, so lighthearted and fun, a place where people can find like-minded people in community. Grant, I did want to go back and say about your notification that Right Minded is going to be an essential part of this. It is. And you will notice that we are going to rebrand it. It will be called Memoir Nation, so don't be surprised when that happens in your feed. And we're going to be rolling this out in stages. So you'll be able to sign up, get a newsletter, get a free PDF to help you write your memoir. We have lots of things going on, some free, some paid, some a la carte, some part of a membership. And then the fun thing about refueling your memoir in January is that that is a New Year's resolution I can get behind. Grant, for people who have listened to us, I think they know we have kind of a
ambivalent,
challenging relationship.
Yeah, challenging. That's it. Challenging.
Ambivalent relationship with resolutions. But Jan Your Story is all about designing your life around the things that you rationally want to achieve, which is kind of our mojo, instead of sinking into more impulsive needs. And writing is difficult, as we all know. So it's easy to get sidetracked by immediate pleasures instead of long-term goals. And so there's more to tell. You know, we'll certainly share more as we go, and especially when we officially launch. But as part of the launch, Grant, we do have an announcement more about this podcast and what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we want to bring all of you, all of our listeners with us on this journey. So as Brooke said, we're going to be rebranding Right Minded as Memoir Nation, so it's a name change and it's a new design, but it's also a new and more specific focus, so it means that we'll be focusing more on memoir and personal writing, but not exclusively, because there's obviously overlap between all the genres. So if we find the right novelist guest, for instance, we're going to want them on the show. But we'll oftentimes tell that story through the lens of Memoir Nation, and focusing on themes and topics that appeal to all of you who are delving into personal writing, or even just listeners who come for the guests and the love of writing and reading.
Yeah, and that's an important point. I do hear from a lot of people who aren't writers per se, but who are fans of the guests that we bring on the show. And I always do love that. I mean, I know we cater primarily to writers, but I think we end up getting some readers on this show feed as well. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being our listeners. And Grant, none of this is going to happen overnight, but we want to tell all of our listeners that you will see the name change, the logo change, all of that stuff will feel and look a little bit different. But if you're subscribed, you'll stay subscribed. And so we want you to know that you didn't accidentally subscribe to some new show called Memoir Nation. It is us. And we're excited to unveil the look and the feel of it. Grant, that could be part of the suspense. So Grant, and one thing we decided we'd do on this show is share that for 7 years of this podcast, we've never asked for any money. We don't have Patreon or any sponsors. This really hasn't been a money-making venture for us. And originally, we were supported by entities that we're no longer affiliated with. You were with NaNoWriMo. I was with She Writes. And as many people know, I have had some major changes with She Writes Press. And so I'm not affiliated with shewrites.com anymore, which was the original entity behind this podcast. So this change and evolution is super exciting for us, and we're really pleased to be able to do that. But we are going to be paying for all of it by ourselves and through Memoir Nation. And so there's going to be a little bit of a fundraise aspect to this. We're going to be looking for sponsors and new advertisers. We do want to just put that out because we may, in fact, be asking for support and donations once we have a system in place, and we won't belabor it. We won't make it painful, but just want to plant the seed that some of that is coming so that we can continue to support this endeavor and hopefully do that with people who want to back us.
Yeah, it's definitely been a labor of love, Brooke. And but that said, Right Minded is one of the best things I have in my life. But I have to acknowledge that, our costs to run this ourselves are going to be quite significant because, hey, we've got an audio engineer, Jeremy, who's silently listening to all this, and he doesn't do it for free. I don't think he wants to do it for free. We could ask him. We put in hours and hours each week ourselves. So I hope people will help us when the time comes, because I feel like this podcast fulfills an important purpose for many, and I hear that from you as well. And speaking of purpose, Brooke, as a writer and as an authorpreneur and business person, I like thinking of the why for things. And I think you have to believe in your book in order to write it, and you have to believe in your business in order to run it successfully. And you've been the one in this 7-year-long co-hosting partnership who has been the most focused on memoir. So I'm curious, why do you think the genre of memoir is important, and why do you want to build Memoir Nation?
Gosh, it's such a big and important question, Grant. And my ideas have really been coalescing in recent years about why memoir is so important. Maybe it's because I've been publishing and teaching memoir for as long as I have, or maybe it's because my personal efforts at writing my own memoir have been challenging and taking longer than I thought. But what I know to be true is that memoir changes lives. And in fact, memoir changes the culture. Memoir writing changes the person who writes the memoir, because the writer will understand and make sense of things in a new way by writing their story. But memoir changes readers too, because it makes readers realize that they're not alone. It gives readers this window into a different way of understanding the world from the vantage point of the lived experience of another person, which is huge. And we've talked about this lots of times in the past, Grant, but memoir builds empathy, and memoir also normalizes hard experiences like loss, like addiction, like living with trauma. To me, there's nothing more profound than opening a book and, seeing that someone else has gone through a hard experience, and then seeing their resilience and how they lived through something. And especially when it involves not having to carry the shame of those things, and showing people that there's a path forward, how we can be stronger for having gone through the experiences we've gone through. And so for me, memoir has been the genre of my heart for more than 20 years. And it's really important to me and really important to so many people, the genre, especially just all these stories that have been put into the world. And I feel that stepping into this with you, Grant, is right where I want to be, right where I need to be. And I know that you too are increasingly interested in memoir, in part because you're writing your own, but I'd love to hear that back from you. Why is memoir important to you?
Yeah, my interest in memoir really deepened when my father died in 2017. He lived a rich life, going from growing up on a poor farm in the Depression, and he was in a family where no one had gone beyond the ninth grade. And he went to law school and traveled widely, but he wasn't a writer. So all of his stories and thoughts died with him. And I kept thinking afterward how priceless it would have been if he'd written just 10,000 words about his life. Not much, but 10,000 words would have been priceless. So I'd like Memoir Nation to help people of all sorts write their story, to have it as a family legacy, but also because I think the world really does change one story at a time for all the reasons you so eloquently and passionately mentioned. I think a lot of stories are buried with shame or other inhibitions, and our world changes when these stories are told. I think of how memoirs have changed our notions of things like addiction and sexual abuse and grieving, so many things that just weren't talked about in the past, but have been unearthed through memoir and put into our public consciousness and personal consciousness, and including my own story. I've been slowly working on my memoir over the past 4 or 5 years, and it's been perhaps the most interesting thing I've ever written. And I say that because it truly is a journey, and a journey of exploration and discovery. And I'm peeling back a lot of layers of the onion, and I'm changing in the process of writing it, which is fascinating to me. And, we recently had Lydia Yuknevich on the show, and she talked about the shifting perspectives we have with our stories. And she even shifted from first person to third person to view a story differently in her life. And that's the way I feel about the writing of the story. Not only am I changing in the writing of the story, but the story itself is changing with my explorations.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. And I think it's a really important point, that you and I both, and lots of people work on these stories for years and years, and then they do change you, and then they someday go out into the world and they change other people. And there are many ways into memoir. I find memoir doesn't really let you go. And I first started getting into memoir in a pretty serious way in 2004. That was because of Seal Press. I started working at this publishing house where we primarily published memoirs, like basically the whole list was memoir because every book was nonfiction. We did no fiction. And even the creative nonfiction and how-to books were very memoir focused in some way or the other, always driven by a personal narrative. And I believe that the influence of personal story will carry us through hard times. We are in a really confusing and confounding time of change right now. It's terrifying. It's chaotic. People are saying it's historic, whether positive, negative, I'll go on the negative side of that, but there is a shift afoot, and, it's the ride that we're on, whether we want to be here or not. And so I think that Memoir Nation is going to be an important place for gathering. I have just felt it everywhere, that people are looking for community, for validation. I've heard too much from people this year that they're tired, that they're thinking about giving up, that they can't write. And the outside world is always going to bring its challenges, always. And yet we know from history, art finds a way. And so if you have that fire in you, however dim, to write your story, then we're going to be providing a lot of content to support you along that journey. And I'm just very excited for all the voices and relationships and future stories that we're going to interact with. Grant, it's going to be great.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Brooke, since we're roughly the same age, we're Gen Xers, and the advent of memoir, so much of it has happened in our life, but memoir has just kind of an odd place, I think, in the publishing world and the world itself. Some memoirs just kind of take over and everyone's talking about them. Yeah. It's a curious genre. So I'm curious if you can remember the first memoir you ever read.
I was thinking about this when you posed it because I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Prozac Nation by Elizabeth Wurtzel. I would have read that in my early 20s before I worked at Seal. I had read a few memoirs before I started at Seal, but, obviously my early exposure to these kinds of books was during my Seal Press years. I remember very much reading Carolyn Knapp's Drinking a Love Story. around 2004 when I was an editor at Seal Press or just got there. The book really changed my life and is one of my favorites to this day. Girl Interrupted comes to mind. It's technically a novel. However, it's very autobiographical in nature. And it's one of the reasons why, Grant, I think we can feel pretty good about bringing novelists on the show from time to time. Over the years, I've been drawn to memoirs about extreme experiences. I've always really liked addiction memoirs. I don't totally understand why, other than to say I'm pretty fascinated by things we do to ourselves, what drives behavior. Maybe just because I'm the child of psychotherapists, but, getting a handle on why we do what we do, how to do things differently, how we survive what we survive. And I think that's what addiction memoirs aim to do. So those are a lot of the ones that stand out to me. But Grant, what about you? What was a first or early memoir you read?
Yeah, speaking of addiction memoirs, although I don't know that it would be really classified that way, but I think I'm going to say F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Crack Up, which wasn't technically a memoir because it was written before memoir was really a form. He wrote it as a series of essays for Esquire that were later collected into a book called The Crack Up. And these were essays, though, that he wrote out of complete desperation because he not only had an alcoholic breakdown, he was broke, but it was really arresting at the time it was published because people didn't bear their feelings so much on the page back then. This was the 1930s, so psychology and therapy were really just beginning to take off and be a part of the wider culture. And in fact, it was considered embarrassing, especially for a man to confess such faults. And Ernest Hemingway famously ridiculed him for airing the dirty laundry of his soul in public and generally being weak. So I read The Crack Up. I read it as anything but weak, however, and I'm thankful, for authors who've written books like that to help us open us up and write about other things that people prefer to remain silent. Before we come to a close, though, Brooke, I asked you to count how many memoirs you acquired for Seal Press and then to guesstimate how many memoirs. That's interesting that you have to guesstimate how many memoirs you've published on She Writes Press. So can you share those numbers and tell me about a book or two that stands out for you?
Well, it was easier to count the Seal Press numbers. That was part of the reason because, I have a list published online actually at Publishers Marketplace. And so I went and counted and there were 90 of them. Woo. Yeah. So 90 memoirs over 7 years at Seal Press that I was responsible specifically for acquiring. But at She Writes Press, it's not that it would have been impossible to count, but we do a lot more books per year than we ever did at Seal. And it's been 13 years. And so I guesstimate that it is about 30 to 40 memoirs a year on She Writes Press. And so even a conservative estimate would be 400 memoirs, so really in the ballpark of 500 plus memoirs that I have been responsible for publishing as a publisher in some capacity over the course of my career. That certainly doesn't count the many, many, many memoirs I've edited or worked on with my coaching clients or whose, the authors have then gone on to self-publish or publish other presses, traditionally hybrid, so there's lots and lots of memoirists out there and then all the classes that I've taught. So I've interacted with tons, and I'm just really excited to bring all of that to Memoir Nation. And I just think it's going to be a ton of fun. But in terms of books that stand out, going through the Seal Press books, I was looking at the list and just remembering about what I was saying about changing the culture, because we did a lot of books by trans authors, of which I was particularly proud, just because, again, it's a conversation changer. It's a culture changer. It brings more empathy. The Testosterone Files by Max Wolf Valerio was one such book. Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano. My gosh, a trans woman author. That book truly changed my life to read about what it's like to transition, the transgender experience specifically. And if you read books like these, you do see and understand things differently. And that's why I think it's so, so, so important in light of these particularly stupid culture wars that we're in. I was just thinking to myself, if all the Republicans could just read these books, I think many of them would change their tune and would come out of the experience, with more open hearts. As far as She Writes goes, there's been a lot of memoirs that have made an impact on me, a few that stand out. A recent one called Hiding for My Life by Karen Solt is about her experience of being closeted in the military. And it was recently named one of Kirkus's best 100 books of the year, which is a huge accomplishment. A couple of our best-selling memoirs include Braided A Journey of 1,000 Challahs, about the experience of making bread together. She advocates for slowing down and taking it all in, an antidote to our fast-paced lives. We published Bright Lights Prairie Dust by Karen Grassley, who played Ma on Little House on the Prairie. And that was kind of fun just because the Little House on the Prairie fans are wild. I mean, they really come out for it. And then we have a forthcoming book called Always There, Always Gone by Marty Ross Dolan, about the legacy of her grandparents, who were the founders of Highlights magazine, and who died in a plane crash long before Marty was born. But that one is touching not only because it's experimental and super well done, but because who wasn't raised on Highlights magazine, and it's just so much to see and unpack about the history of that family. Grant, honestly, this podcast could go on for 3 hours if I touted all the memoirs I've worked on and
Keep
championed. Yeah. But I just want to say, each of those stories gets out into the world and makes an impact on its readers. And I think this is why we do what we do. And it's why with Memoir Nation, it's just going to be another portal to support people, because it's not easy to stay with it and to stay the course, to finish, to publish. And we're going to be a resource for all that. So I can't wait.
Absolutely. Those memoirs you just mentioned. I mean, when I say the world changes one story at a time, that is it. People telling their stories and other people then understanding them. That's why you weren't Republicans to read some of these, is that, trans people aren't the other, they're us. But I can't wait to learn more about others' life stories and learn about my own in tandem with others, because as I said, stories change the world. So we're going to change the world with Memoir Nation. And I hope you'll all come with us on that journey.